Two boxers are in the ring, Gunwoo and Woojin. Woojin is more experienced and a senior boxer, but Gunwoo's powerful left hook proves to be devastating for Woojin. Gunwoo defeats his opponent with ease. This victory highlights Gunwoo's dedication and hardworking nature, which helps him succeed in every fight. After the match, as Gunwoo is heading home, he waits at the bus stop. There, he notices a drunk man. When the bus arrives, the driver asks the drunk man to wear a mask before boarding since the COVID pandemic has affected the nation. However, the drunk man refuses to comply and starts arguing with the driver. Standing nearby, Gunwoo steps in, calmly guiding the drunk man off the bus and encouraging him to walk home instead. Despite the drunk man trying to hit Gunwoo several times, Gunwoo doesn't retaliate or act harshly. He simply dodges the attacks and respectfully insists that the man head home on foot. This act earns Gunwoo applause from the other passengers, proving that he is a kind and respectful person. When Gunwoo arrives home, he overhears his mother on the phone. She's requesting more time to pay the rent for her store, which reveals that Gunwoo's family is struggling financially. Determined to support his mother, Gunwoo enters another boxing competition. His skill and determination allow him to easily reach the finals. Due to the pandemic, his mother watches the match on her mobile phone. In the finals, Gunwoo faces Woojin once again. Woojin, proud of his experience, is confident he'll win. However, his coach warns him to watch out for Gunwoo's left hook. Ignoring the advice, Woojin boasts about being a former Marine champion, claiming no one can defeat him. Once in the ring, Woojin devises a plan to block Gunwoo's left hook and counter with his own left punch. But when Woojin lets his guard down, inviting Gunwoo to strike, Gunwoo seizes the moment and lands a single, powerful blow that knocks Woojin out. Gunwoo becomes the champion once again. Later, Woojin sits with his coach, who is also his father. Woojin suggests going out for a meal, but his father declines, explaining that most restaurant dining rooms are closed due to COVID-19. Instead, his father gives him money to order takeout and eat in his room. As Woojin leaves the boxing venue, he notices Gunwoo waiting for him. Gunwoo stands up and invites Woojin to have a meal together. Initially, Woojin suspects Gunwoo is mocking him, but when he realizes Gunwoo's offer is genuine, he agrees. During the meal, Woojin is amazed by Gunwoo's left hook and asks if he's left-handed. Gunwoo explains that he's actually right-handed, but takes every opportunity to use his left hand when it's advantageous. Woojin is even more impressed that he was defeated with a single hit from Gunwoo's weaker hand. As they talk, Gunwoo reveals that boxing is just a part-time hobby for him, as he needs to earn money to support his mother. Gunwoo also mentions that he's 2 years younger than Woojin and works other part-time jobs, including one at a barbecue restaurant. Woojin can't help but admire Gunwoo's skills when Gunwoo grills the steaks they're eating to perfection. Trying to hold on to his pride, Woojin brings up his Marine experience. But Gunwoo surprises him by revealing that he's also a Marine and holds a higher rank than Woojin. Shocked and humbled, Woojin stands up and salutes Gunwoo as his senior. From that moment, a strong friendship begins to form between the two boxers. At the cafe, Gunwoo's mother is pleading with the moneylender for more time to repay her loan. Just then, Gunwoo arrives and greets her. His mother, having watched his boxing match earlier on her phone, is proud of her son. Gunwoo hands her the prize money from the match, asking her to use it to pay off her debts. Initially, his mother refuses to take the money, but after Gunwoo insists, she reluctantly accepts it, promising to pay him back later. Afterward, they close the cafe and head home together. On the way, Gunwoo notices a suspicious car parked nearby, but decides to ignore it for the moment. The car belongs to Mr. Kim, a loan shark with plans to build a casino and nightclub near the cafe. Mr. Kim profits by giving loans with low interest rates, only to inflate the terms later so that borrowers end up losing their collateral. Determined to take over the area, he orders his men to deceive the locals with his predatory schemes. The next day, Mr. Kim launches an initiative claiming to pay off people's debts at a lower interest rate than banks. Banks are offering loans at 7% interest, while Mr. Kim's plan advertises a tempting 5% rate. However, the fine print includes an extension fee that borrowers must pay within 24 hours to maintain the lower interest. This hidden clause ensures that most people fail to meet the terms. Mr. Kim's agents begin targeting landowners in the area, luring them into the trap by offering seemingly generous terms. Many residents, desperate due to the worsening economy during the COVID pandemic, sign the contracts and put their land up as collateral. One of Mr. Kim's agents even approaches Gunwoo's mother, enticing her with the promise of a low-interest loan. Unaware of the scheme, she also falls into the trap and signs the agreement. Meanwhile, COVID continues to wreak havoc across the nation, destroying businesses and forcing many people to take out loans just to survive. Mr. Kim sees this as an opportunity to profit further. One of his men meets with Chairman Hong of Lil Group to convince him to invest in Mr. Kim's casino and nightclub project. Chairman Hong is hesitant, as he has already invested in Mr. Kim's ventures and has yet to see any returns. Mr. Kim joins the meeting, apologizing for being late. He pressures Chairman Hong to sign the new investment contract, using the influence of the city's mayor as leverage. Intimidated, Chairman Hong reluctantly agrees. Later, Mr. Kim is seen celebrating with his partners, confident that they've secured the funds they need. To strengthen their bond, the mayor gifts Mr. Kim an expensive item, hoping to benefit from the partnership in the future. However, unbeknownst to them, the entire interaction is being recorded by a hidden camera. The next day, Gunwoo heads to the gym to train, but it's closed due to positive COVID cases linked to his last match. With the day free, he calls Woojin, who is still in bed. Woojin texts Gunwoo his location and asks him to come over. On his way, Gunwoo sees a masked person chasing a homeless man. Concerned, Gunwoo runs after them to help the man. After a short chase, he finds the homeless man lying on the ground, bleeding from his nose, while the masked person flees with something they've taken from the man. Gunwoo pursues the masked figure, who hides behind a wall. When Gunwoo gets close, the masked person uses a taser to threaten him. The masked person turns out to be a young woman named Hyunju. She confronts Gunwoo, asking why he's chasing her and what his connection is to the homeless man. Gunwoo replies that he was only trying to help and has no relation to the man. Hyunju then reveals that the homeless man is not truly homeless, he's been faking it to avoid repaying his loan. After explaining, she leaves. Hyunju returns to a bookstore where her grandfather, Mr. Choi, is speaking with a woman who wants to repay a loan she borrowed from him. Mr. Choi insists that she first repay her other debts before paying him back. Unlike Mr. Kim, Mr. Choi is kind-hearted, providing interest-free loans to people facing medical emergencies. Hyunju, however, disapproves of his leniency. She believes he should charge interest and demand more in return for his help. Mr. Choi defends his actions, explaining that he once helped a girl with cancer who might have died without financial support. He says his money is being used for good causes, which gives him satisfaction. He also warns Hyunju not to take matters into her own hands, as she did with the man earlier. Concerned for Hyunju's safety, Mr. Choi contacts an old associate, Mr. Moon, to arrange for a bodyguard to protect his granddaughter. At Gunwoo's mother's cafe, a man named Junmin, working for Mr. Kim, arrives demanding that she pay interest for failing to pay the extension fee on time. Gunwoo's mother is confused, explaining that no one mentioned an extension fee when she signed the loan contract. When she threatens to call the police, Junmin storms out and orders his men to destroy the cafe. Panicked, Gunwoo's mother calls him, her voice trembling, and pleads with him to come quickly. Gunwoo, hearing the fear in her voice, sprints to the cafe. When he arrives, the cafe is in ruins, and Junmin is taunting his mother. Surrounded by a group of suited thugs, Junmin feels confident, but Gunwoo confronts them head-on, using his boxing skills to fight through the group. Though outnumbered, Gunwoo manages to defeat all of them, leaving Junmin terrified. Gunwoo grabs Junmin by the collar and demands to know why he is there. Just then, Mr. Kim appears, calmly stating that Gunwoo's mother borrowed money from him and hasn't repaid it. Gunwoo firmly tells Mr. Kim that they will repay the loan, but only after Mr. Kim compensates them for the damage done to the cafe. Mr. Kim smirks and calls forward Inbeom, a large, intimidating man with a sinister expression. Gunwoo tries to fight Inbeom, but his punches have little effect. Inbeom, on the other hand, lands one powerful blow that nearly knocks Gunwoo out. Gunwoo gives everything he has, eventually managing to make Inbeom bleed slightly, but it's not enough. Impressed by Gunwoo's determination, Mr. Kim offers him a job working for him. Gunwoo, in disgust, spits in Mr. Kim's face. Angered, Mr. Kim pulls out a knife, slashing Gunwoo across the face, and warns him that if he goes to the police, he'll kill his mother. After the attack, Gunwoo and his mother end up in the hospital. While his mother worries about him, Gunwoo sits quietly as the doctor stitches his wound. The doctor advises him to get further treatment to prevent scarring, but Gunwoo declines, saying it's too expensive. Later, Gunwoo shows his injuries to Woojin, who urges him to go to the police. Gunwoo refuses, recalling Mr. Kim's threat. Woojin then examines the loan contract Gunwoo's mother signed and points out the fine print, which states that failing to pay the extension fee within 24 hours results in skyrocketing interest rates. Both of them realize they're in serious trouble and need $70 to repay the loan. To lighten the mood, Woojin takes Gunwoo out for a meal. While eating, Gunwoo calls his mother, assuring her that he'll clean up the cafe and find a way to repay the debt. When the call ends, Gunwoo notices Woojin on the phone, pleading with someone to lend him money to help Gunwoo. Touched by Woojin's efforts, Gunwoo becomes emotional, realizing how much his friend cares. Later, they visit a moneylender Woojin had contacted. The moneylender agrees to give them the funds, but only if they agree to work for him as bloodhounds for 2 years. The job would involve using force to collect debts from others, something neither Woojin nor Gunwoo wants to do. Gunwoo stands up and refuses the offer, prompting Woojin to return the money, and they leave together. Determined to find another solution, Woojin calls a different contact and explains the situation. This time, the man agrees to help. They rush to meet him and discover it's Mr. Moon, a senior Marine. Mr. Moon says he's willing to help because they're fellow Marines. He also mentions Mr. Choi, a kind-hearted man who might lend them the money. However, in return, Mr. Choi would require them to work as bodyguards for his granddaughter. Mr. Moon had already spoken to Mr. Choi about Gunwoo and Woojin through Mr. Oh and Mook, who works closely with Mr. Choi. While riding in his car, Mr. Oh shows Mr. Choi the profiles of both boys. Mr. Choi is impressed with Gunwoo, noticing his strong physique and deducing his dedication to his work, though Gunwoo lacks prior experience. Woojin, on the other hand, has worked with loan sharks in the past, which Mr. Oh points out as an advantage. Mr. Choi decides to meet Gunwoo first and suggests they consider Woojin later. The next day, both friends arrive at a butcher shop to meet Mr. Choi. At the entrance, a man in a white martial arts uniform allows only Gunwoo to enter, leaving Woojin outside. Once inside, Gunwoo greets Mr. Choi and sits down with him. Noticing the wound on Gunwoo's face, Mr. Choi asks about it, and Gunwoo recounts the story of how his mother's cafe was destroyed. Mr. Choi admits that he used to be involved in similar business dealings in the past, but he has since left that life behind. Mr. Choi offers Gunwoo $70 as an advance for working as a bodyguard for the next 2 years, suggesting he use the money to pay off his mother's debt. Hearing this, Gunwoo's face lights up, and he quickly accepts the offer. Outside, Gunwoo excitedly shares the news with Woojin, and the two jump with joy. Back at home, they tell Gunwoo's mother about the job. Overwhelmed with relief, she prepares a delicious meal for them. Later, there's a knock at the door, and Gunwoo finds Mr. Oh standing outside. He has brought the money on Mr. Choi's behalf. Seeing the money, Gunwoo becomes emotional and thanks him profusely. Gunwoo then takes the money inside, showing it to his mother and friend, and expresses his gratitude to Woojin for supporting him during such a difficult time. The following day, the boys head to their new job at 10 a.m. However, Woojin is not selected for the position. Determined, he accompanies Gunwoo anyway, hoping to speak with Mr. Choi. When they meet, Woojin pleads his case, and Mr. Choi is quickly convinced, agreeing to hire both boys. However, he explains that they still need to pass an interview with his granddaughter, Hyunju, who must approve them as her bodyguards. Gunwoo grows anxious, knowing he's already used the advance money to repay his mother's debts and that his job isn't yet secured. Mr. Choi reassures him, confident they will succeed. He even gives the boys some cash for food while they wait for Hyunju. While waiting at the bookstore, the boys spot a box on a shelf and curiously open it, only to find it filled with cash. Looking around, they notice several other boxes stuffed with money, hidden in book covers. They estimate there are billions of won stored there. At that moment, Hyunju arrives to meet them. Woojin tries to persuade her to accept them as bodyguards, but fails because Hyunju insists she doesn't need anyone to protect her. She believes she can handle herself. Frustrated, Woojin leaves the room. Seeing this, Gunwoo kneels and pleads with Hyunju, explaining that he's already taken money from Mr. Choi to repay his mother's debt and desperately needs this job. He suggests she let them work as bodyguards for a month, and if she's unhappy with their performance, they'll leave voluntarily. Moved by Gunwoo's sincerity and determination, Hyunju softens and agrees. She takes them to a cafe for a meal. While there, Hyunju speculates that the wound on Gun-woo's face was caused by loan sharks. She reveals that in her spare time, she investigates predatory lending operations. She explains that there's a gang stealing ideas from homeless people to apply for loans in their names, trapping them in cycles of debt. She even shows them a picture of Junmin, who she believes leads the gang. Gun-woo recognizes Junmin as one of the men who helped destroy his mother's cafe. Intrigued, Hyunju decides to involve the boys in her investigation. She takes them in her car and asks them to tail the gang members and report back on how many homeless people they target in one night. Later, they follow 3 gang members to a salon, where the men disguise themselves by applying fake beards, black makeup, and shabby clothes to look like poor, desperate individuals. Once disguised, they climb into a van and drive to a railway station, with Hyunju and the boys trailing closely behind. At the station, the gang members approach a homeless man and pretend to be government officials, claiming they're registering needy people for a new government aid program. The program, they say, will provide food and a monthly stipend. The homeless man, believing their lies, hands over his ID. From behind a wall, Gun-woo and Woojin watch the entire interaction unfold, relaying everything to Hyunju over the phone. The gang members move on to their next target, but this time, the man recognizes them. He starts yelling at them, demanding they return his ID, which they had stolen during an earlier scam. In response, the gang begins beating the man mercilessly. Gun-woo wants to intervene, but Woojin stops him, reminding him that Hyunju instructed them not to engage. However, when Gun-woo sees the old man bleeding profusely and his life in danger, he can't hold back and jumps in to help. One of the gangsters, Young Jae-myung, recognizes Gun-woo because he was the same man Hyunju was chasing when Gun-woo interrupted. Young also notices the cap Gun-woo is wearing. It's the same one Hyunju had on earlier. Gun-woo and Woojin fight off the gang members and manage to make them flee. Afterward, they call an ambulance and get the injured man to the hospital, saving his life. When they tell Hyunju what happened, she's furious. She scolds them, explaining that their actions have now made the gang more alert and cautious. Woojin calls her again, asking her to meet them in person. She reluctantly agrees and asks them to come to the bookstore. Once they arrive, Hyunju expresses her anger, accusing them of ruining her plan. Woojin, losing his temper, starts arguing with her. Gun-woo steps in to defuse the situation. He calmly explains his perspective, showing her the scar on his face that was caused by a loan shark. He tells her that the scar is a constant reminder of why he must stand up for people who are being hurt by these criminals. When he saw the poor men being beaten, he couldn't just stand by. It was the right thing to do. After saying this, Gun-woo hands the cap back to Hyunju and leaves with Woojin, resigning from the job. Despite their situation, Gun-woo vows to find a way to repay Mr. Choi's money. As they leave the bookstore, Hyunju is moved by Gun-woo's words. Later, she texts them both, asking them to return to work the next morning. When they see her message, they are overjoyed and start celebrating. Meanwhile, Young informs Junmin about the attack on their group. He mentions recognizing the cap worn by the attacker. It belonged to the old moneylender from whom he had borrowed in the past. The next day, Hyunju and the boys gather to discuss their next steps. While they're talking, they notice a group of people approaching the bookstore. It's the same gang members they confronted the previous night. Hyunju quickly shuts the store and turns off the lights, hoping the gangsters won't find them. Young and Junmin start kicking the shutters of the shops, trying to find their target. They notice the bookstore's shutter is made of a different material than the others, which raises their suspicions. Later, when things calm down, Hyunju, Gun-woo, and Woojin try to figure out how the gang found their location. Gun-woo remembers wearing Hyunju's cap during the fight, which might have tipped them off. Mr. Choi returns to the bookstore and enters a code to open the shutters. He asks the group what happened. After learning about Junmin and his gang, Mr. Choi reprimands Hyunju for getting involved in such dangerous business. Hyunju defends herself, saying she had no choice but to investigate the matter. She reminds Mr. Choi that he raised her to help people in need, and that she is no longer a child. Gun-woo also steps in, showing his scar and justifying their actions as a fight for justice and their rights. As the group leaves the bookstore, Mr. Choi remains concerned for their safety. He warns that the people they are dealing with won't let them off easily. He asks Mr. Oh to look deeper into the matter. Outside, Hyunju and the boys decide to grab a meal, with Woojin treating them this time. Their bond grows stronger, and Hyunju begins to act more like a friend than a boss, cracking jokes and joining in their camaraderie. At the restaurant, Hyunju opens up about her past. She reveals that Mr. Choi is not her biological grandfather. He adopted her from an orphanage after her real father committed an unthinkable act. Meanwhile, Mr. Choi receives a call from Mr. Oh, who informs him that Junmin is working for Mr. Kim under his loan company, Smile Capital. This revelation triggers a flashback to Mr. Choi's younger days when he was running his own loan company with employees, including Mr. Kim and Mr. Moon. One night, while Mr. Choi was at home, he received a call from a security guard reporting that two thieves had broken into his office. Mr. Choi quickly got ready and rushed to the scene. Meanwhile, a young Inbium was inside the office, instructing an expert to open Mr. Choi's safe. When the safe was finally unlocked, Inbium and his accomplice were overjoyed at the sight of all the money inside. Just then, Mr. Choi arrived and engaged in a fierce fight with the intruders. He managed to overpower both Inbium and his partner. However, there was a third person in the room, Mr. Kim. Seizing the opportunity, Mr. Kim stabbed Mr. Choi in the back. Injured but not defeated, Mr. Choi turned around and began fighting Mr. Kim. Though weakened, he slashed Mr. Kim's face with a knife, leaving a large scar. Before Mr. Choi could finish the fight, Inbium grabbed him from behind and threw him out of the building through a window. Inbium then gathered all the money while Mr. Kim set the office on fire. Looking down from the window, Inbium noticed that Mr. Choi was no longer on the ground. In the present, Mr. Choi meets with Hyunju and assures her that he will personally deal with the scammers, advising her not to worry about them anymore. On the other hand, Mr. Kim is preparing for another meeting with Chairman Hong. This time, Chairman Hong arrives with his cousin, who is a police officer named Gwangyong. Mr. Kim, feeling uneasy, tells his accomplice Jang Do to remain calm during the meeting. Chairman Hong and Gwangyong invite Mr. Kim to drink with them before discussing any business. They down peg after peg, and eventually, Gwangyong places handcuffs on the table, warning Mr. Kim that he will be arrested if he continues his illegal activities or bothers Chairman Hong again. Both cousins mock Mr. Kim, but he sits silently, showing no reaction. As Chairman Hong leans in closer, he sternly warns Mr. Kim to stay away from the little group's family members. After the cousins leave, Mr. Kim rushes to a restroom to vomit out the alcohol and then orders Jang Do to capture Chairman Hong. The next day, Chairman Hong stops at his usual car wash. Suddenly, the shop shutters slam down and Mr. Kim's men drag him out of his car. Jang Do slaps Chairman Hong and tells him that he must pay for his disrespect toward Mr. Kim. They proceed to beat Chairman Hong, force him to drink gasoline, and strip him of his clothes. The gang films the humiliation and sends the video to Mr. Kim, who laughs as he watches it. The following day, Mr. Kim takes Inbium to a shipping port. Inside a container, Mr. Kim shows him stacks of gold bars, explaining that he learned it from Mr. Choi to invest in gold since currency tends to devalue over time. He tells Inbium that he considers him a brother and promises to take him overseas once they've accumulated more wealth. Meanwhile, Hyunju and the boys devise a new plan to catch the scammers in the act. They plan to follow the van transporting disguised individuals from the salon to the railway station. However, the scammers are now on high alert, knowing someone has been tracking them. This time, the gang sets a trap. Yang lures Gunwoo and Woojin into an underground alley, where he blocks their escape routes by surrounding them with his men. Watching from her car outside, Hyunju immediately calls her grandfather for help. Mr. Choi quickly contacts his old ally, Lee Do-young, to assist. Back in the alley, a fight breaks out between Gunwoo, Woojin, and the gang. When Gunwoo removes his mask, Junmin recognizes him and panics, immediately informing Mr. Kim of Gunwoo's presence. Gunwoo and Woojin hold their own, using their skills to fight off the gang. Soon, Hyunju joins the battle, and together, the three of them overpower the entire group of goons. Meanwhile, Mr. Kim sends someone to kidnap Gunwoo's mother. However, Mr. Choi is one step ahead. He's already sent his right-hand man, Hwang, to protect her. Hwang, an expert with knives, takes down each of the kidnappers one by one. His attacks are so precise and deadly that no one can stand against him. Even young Jae-mung has to flee for his life, abandoning the hostage in the process. Hwang chases after Mung and manages to slash both his ankles, leaving him incapacitated. Elsewhere, Lee arrives at the underground alley to assist the kids, but by the time he gets there, the children have already fought off all the enemies and left. As Du Yong heads back, a gang member notices him and tries to confront him. But Du Yong quickly knocks him out by slamming his head into a metal frame. Shortly after, Huang and Du Yong old friends meet again after many years. Gunwoo's mother is also safe and sound at Mr. Choi's house. Mr. Choi scolds the kids for chasing after the goons without his permission. He firmly warns them to stay out of the matter this time. The next day, Mr. Kim visits the hospital to check on the injured kidnappers. He learns that the person who took them down is highly skilled with knives. Suspecting it to be Huang, Mr. Kim recalls that Huang used to work for Mr. Choi and knows his closest allies. Meanwhile, Huang tells Du Yong they should have eliminated Mr. Kim a long time ago, but have held back out of respect for Mr. Choi's orders. Mr. Kim explains to Junmin that back in the day, Huang and Du Yong were famous assassins, renowned for their skills and known as Mr. Choi's left and right hands. This time, it seems Mr. Kim is genuinely intimidated by his enemies. On the other side, Mr. Choi and his team are devising a plan to take down Mr. Kim and his men. Mr. Kim has an ally in Jang Do, a retired police officer who knows the ins and outs of the police system and is skilled at covering Mr. Kim's tracks. The plan tasks Wang with eliminating Jang Do, while Du Yong will handle Junmin. The team also needs to move cash stored at a bookstore. Mr. O suggests involving the kids in this task, an idea Du Yong supports as he's already seen their potential in the underground alley. Later, as Gunwoo and Woojin enjoy a meal prepared by Gunwoo's mother, Hyeonju joins them. She receives a message instructing them to move the cash. The trio grabs some empty boxes and 2 cars to transport the money. While Hyeonju stacks cash into boxes, Gunwoo and Woojin head to the basement to grab a trolley. At that moment, enemies ambush them. Imbium chases the boys into the basement, while Jangdo knocks Hyeonju unconscious from behind and handcuffs her. Meanwhile, Gunwoo, furious, fights Imbium and beats him so badly that Woojin has to intervene. They tie up Imbium and leave him unconscious. Hyeonju regains consciousness as Jang-do is carrying her. She slips from his grip, fights him off even with her hands cuffed, and ultimately locks him in his own handcuffs before leaving him behind. Hyeonju reunites with the boys, and they finish loading the cash onto the trolleys. Just as they're about to leave, Jang-do frees himself and informs Mr. Kim of the situation. Furious, Mr. Kim berates Jang-do for failing to handle the kids and orders him to call reinforcements immediately, even before seeking medical attention. In the meantime, the kids load the cash, gold, and stacks of dollars into their vehicles. As they drive off, the enemies catch up, and a high-speed chase ensues. Hyeonju rams one of the enemy cars, forcing it off the road, and allows Gunwoo's SUV to take the lead, as it carries the majority of the stash. During the chase, Hyeonju's car breaks down, and they're forced to flee on foot, carrying bags of gold and cash. The weight of the bags slows them down, and with the enemies closing in, they abandon the bags to save themselves. They manage to reach Gunwoo's SUV, where he's made room for them by discarding some cash bags. Together, they escape the scene. Meanwhile, Mr. Choi is informed that the kids were attacked by the goons and that they weren't able to recover all the money. However, Mr. Choi is more worried about the kids' safety than the missing money. When Hyeonju comes to meet him, his only concern is whether she's hurt. Thankfully, Hyeonju and the boys are unharmed. Back in the bookstore basement, Inbia manages to free himself, and Mr. Kim's men take him to the hospital. Du Yong is keeping a close watch on him under Mr. Choi's orders. Mr. Kim, aware of Mr. Choi's intentions for sparing Imbium, instructs his men to stay alert for any suspicious activity from their enemies. The next day, Mr. Choi tells Gunwoo that he's grateful for his efforts in recovering a significant portion of the money from the bookstore. As a token of his gratitude, he clears Gunwoo's debt and expresses appreciation for how Gunwoo has brought a smile to Hyeonju's face. He even suggests that Gunwoo should stay by Hyeonju's side in the future. Later, Hwang treats the kids to his signature pork bites, showcasing his culinary skills. Du Yong joins them and reveals that Hwang is also a senior Marine. Woo Jin, impressed, salutes him as a fellow Marine, and they all discuss their next steps in taking down Mr. Kim's group. Hwang prepares the boys to go after Jang-do by training them in knife handling and boxing. Meanwhile, Hyeonju is assigned to work with Du Yong, who teaches her how to knock someone off balance while riding a motorcycle. At night, Du Yong and Hyeonju wait for Junmin in a parking lot. When Junmin arrives, Do-young blinds him with his bike's headlights and slashes his throat while riding past him. Suddenly, a car speeds toward Do-young and hits him, as if they had anticipated his attack on Junmin. The goons begin to beat Do-young, but Hyunju steps in to rescue him. She takes down the attackers and frees him from their grasp. Meanwhile, Hwang and the boys carry out their plan to kidnap Jang-do. When Jang-do takes the elevator to get food for his men at the hospital, Hwang and the boys take the stairs and intercept him before the elevator doors open. They ambush Jang-do and take him away. A gang member spots them, but the boys quickly deal with him as well. Back at the house, Mr. Choi receives a message confirming Jang-do's capture. He immediately heads to the location where Jang-do is being held. Along the way, he calls Hwang and tells him to prepare Jang-do for questioning and to let the kids observe the interrogation. At the location, Hwang and the boys begin torturing Jang-do. They burn the skin on his thighs and pour salt water over the wounds, repeating the process on the other thigh. The sight is too much for Hyunju, who runs outside and vomits. When Mr. Choi arrives, he tells Hyunju there is still much for her to learn. Mr. Choi sits in front of Jang-do, fully aware of his vulnerabilities. He knows Jang-do has been planning to betray Mr. Kim and has been secretly accumulating wealth to secure his escape. Mr. Choi offers Jang-do a large sum of money and a house in a location where Mr. Kim could never find him. In return, he demands all of Mr. Kim's secrets. Jang-do agrees, and Do-young records the confession on his phone. Jang-do reveals that Mr. Kim is a loan shark who preys on people who borrow from Mr. Choi. After they receive loans from Mr. Choi at zero interest, Mr. Kim pressures them into paying extension fees by threatening to seize their collateral. Additionally, Mr. Kim has a collection of compromising videos of influential figures and businesspeople in the city, which he uses for blackmail. For example, he's currently blackmailing the chairman of Lil Group, Hong, to force him into investing in a casino and nightclub that Mr. Kim plans to open soon. Jang-do also reveals that Mr. Kim's gold is hidden in a secret location that only Inbeom knows about. Mr. Kim trusts Inbeom more than anyone else, even considering him like a brother, so all his secrets are entrusted to him. Meanwhile, Chairman Hong meets with Mr. Kim again. During their conversation, Hong's cousin listens in on the call. However, Mr. Kim catches on and beats Chairman Hong for allowing this. He then forces Hong to track down two bikers who killed Junmin earlier, using his cousin's influence within the police department. Mr. Kim gives him a strict 5-hour deadline, warning that if he's late, a compromising video of Chairman Hong will be uploaded to social media. At the same time, the boys are traveling with their seniors in a car when they receive an invitation from Mr. Choi for drinks at his house. Mr. Choi seems to be in high spirits, and he's treating them because he's reconciled with Hyunju. They even talk about their plans to visit Rome once everything is settled. At Mr. Choi's house, they all enjoy drinks together. Woojin cracks some jokes, and they have a great time. After the party, Hwang and Do-young sit down to talk about their past lives. During the conversation, Do-young gets a call from his wife, who tells him he's about to become a father. He's been keeping this a secret from both Hwang and Mr. Choi. Hwang, understanding the importance of family, tells Do-young to go home, spend time with his wife, and even gives him some money for his family before booking him a cab. Meanwhile, Chairman Hong's cousin discovers the location of the bikers. Mr. Kim and his men immediately head there, but the location turns out to be empty. However, they find clues that point to Do-young's address, including footprints in salt water that indicate Jang-do was tortured and likely confessed everything about Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim and his men go to Do-young's house and knock on the door. When his wife comes to answer, Do-young stops her. He peeks through the peephole and the windows, sensing something is wrong. Acting quickly, he locks his wife in a room for safety and blocks the door with a refrigerator and a chair to slow down the intruders. The goons break the windows and force their way inside. Do-young fights fiercely, giving it his all until his final breath. As he fights, Mr. Kim demands to know Hwang's location in exchange for sparing his wife. Eventually, Do-young is overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Mr. Choi enjoys breakfast with the boys and Hyunju, prepared by Gunwoo's mother. The food is so good that Mr. Choi asks her to cook for the children at his orphanage. Later, Gunwoo and Hyunju take his mother to the orphanage, leaving Woojin and Mr. Choi alone at home. By this time, Mr. Kim has reached Hwang's shop. Hwang immediately suspects that Mr. Kim has killed Do-young and his wife to find his location. Mr. Kim confirms this, and the two begin to fight. Though Hwang is skilled with knives, Mr. Kim has an advantage. His shoes have blades at the front. Mr. Kim injures Hwang's legs early in the fight, and ultimately stabs him with his own knife, killing him. After killing Hwang, Mr. Kim and his men head to Mr. Choi's house. Woojin senses something is wrong and alerts Mr. Choi. Acting quickly, Mr. Choi heads to the basement and starts loading his gun. In the meantime, Woojin fights Mr. Kim's men alone. Mr. Choi soon joins the fight, taking down several enemies with his gun. Unfortunately, Woojin is stabbed badly in the abdomen and collapses on the first floor. While Mr. Choi is reloading his gun, Inbeom attacks him, throwing him to the ground with full force. Mr. Kim arrives and taunts Mr. Choi, saying he's learned a lot from him and will grant him a painless death. With that, Mr. Kim slashes Mr. Choi's throat. Mr. Kim and his men then take all the cash and gold from the safe and set the house on fire. After they leave, Gunwoo and Hyunju return home. They find Woojin gravely injured, but Mr. Choi is already dead. Gunwoo carries Woojin out of the burning house while Hyunju follows. The fire consumes the entire home, reducing it to ashes. At the hospital, Woojin is in critical condition due to severe blood loss. Gunwoo donates his blood to save his friend's life. Hyunju, devastated by her grandfather's death, silently leaves the hospital, unable to process her grief. Later, the doctors inform Gunwoo that Woojin's operation was successful and he is now out of danger. A few days pass, and we see Woojin and Gunwoo waking up in an apartment in a remote area. They begin their day with a jog along the coast and eventually arrive at a gym. There, they start lifting weights and training, clearly preparing for their next boxing championship. Mr. Oh has been housing the boys during their recovery. Now that they're fully healed, they ask him for permission to leave and take revenge on Mr. Kim. However, Mr. Oh refuses, insisting they're still just kids and not ready for such a dangerous mission. The boys try to convince him by explaining their plan. They'll approach the victims of Mr. Kim's criminal enterprises and rally them together for revenge. Despite their arguments, Mr. Oh stands firm and denies their request. The next day, Mr. Oh visits Mr. Choi's memorial. There, he finds a letter left by Hyunju. In it, she explains that she's leaving for Rome because staying near this area makes it impossible for her to move on from Grandpa's death. After reading her letter, Mr. Oh returns home with a change of heart. He gathers the boys and hands them a bag full of money, along with the keys to an apartment he's arranged for them in the city, and a car for transportation. Finally, he gives them his blessing, urging them to avenge Mr. Choi. The boys take a bus to the city and settle into the apartment Mr. Oh arranged for them. There, they meet a young woman, who happens to be Mr. Oh's granddaughter, and learn that she be living next door. Once settled, the boys begin planning their next move. They first approach other moneylenders who were victims of Mr. Kim's schemes. However, they're met with rejection. These lenders explain that while they'd love to recover their stolen money, standing up to Mr. Kim could get them killed. Fear keeps everyone silent. Undeterred, the boys visit Mr. Moon, another victim of Mr. Kim's loan sharking. They find him in terrible condition, beaten and broken from trying to resist. Afterward, the boys take a different approach and kidnap Yang, one of Mr. Kim's associates. To their surprise, Yang cooperates and reveals critical information about Mr. Kim's illegal business. He tells them about a collection of incriminating videos Mr. Kim keeps on his phone, including one involving Chairman Hong, Mr. Kim's most recent victim. Back at their apartment, the boys use a computer to search for Chairman Hong. They send him a friend request on a social media app, but the neighbor, Mr. Oh's granddaughter, interrupts and stops them from using her computer any further. Meanwhile, Chairman Hong meets with Mr. Kim again. Mr. Kim is frustrated because Hong still hasn't secured the investment for his casino and nightclub project. Hong explains that his father is refusing to provide the money, which is causing the delay. Mr. Kim has no patience for excuses and signals Inbeom to threaten Hong. Inbeom intimidates Hong by implying he'll throw him off the high-rise building they're in. Terrified, Hong agrees to convince his father to release the funds. Back in his car, Chairman Hong breaks down in tears over his misfortune and the trauma he's endured for weeks. Suddenly, he receives a text message instructing him to meet with the sender if he wants to escape Mr. Kim's control. Hong discusses the message with his cousin, Gangyong, and arranges a meeting. At the meeting, Hong and Gangyong invite Gunwoo and Woojin for drinks, hoping to discuss matters openly. Woo-jin declines, explaining that his liver was damaged when he was stabbed by Mr. Kim's men. Gun-woo doesn't drink either, but seeing the importance of the situation, he agrees to drink this one time. He surprises everyone by downing glass after glass, while Hong and Gangyong get completely drunk. In their intoxicated state, they begin spilling secrets about Mr. Kim. The next morning, Hong and Gangyong wake up in their house, confused to find Gun-woo and Woo-jin already there. The boys reveal they brought them home the previous night, after the meeting got out of hand. To help them recover, Gun-woo and Woo-jin have prepared noodle soup to cure their hangovers. Afterward, Gangyong takes the boys to his office, where they meet two police officers. Together, they form a plan to take down Mr. Kim. The first step is to obtain evidence against him, which requires gaining access to his phone. The team identifies two possible methods: either trick Mr. Kim into scanning a tampered QR code or connect his phone to a Wi-Fi router that's under their control. Not wanting to leave anything to chance, they decide to use both methods. The team sets up cameras throughout a building and arranges a meeting with Mr. Kim, where Chairman Hong is supposed to sign a contract. When Mr. Kim arrives and scans the QR code to enter the building, the police successfully connect to his phone. However, to their shock, they find no incriminating data on the device. In the meeting room, Chairman Hong is still unsure of himself, haunted by the trauma of dealing with Mr. Kim. Through the camera, Gangyong notices that Mr. Kim has another phone in his bag. Their new goal is to connect that phone to their Wi-Fi router. Chairman Hong steps out of the building to ask if the team has managed to retrieve the data. Gangyong informs him they haven't succeeded yet, but assures him they have a backup plan. However, for it to work, Chairman Hong must regain his confidence. Gangyong encourages him and sends him back into the meeting room. Inside, Chairman Hong asks the lawyers to step out, stating that he needs a private conversation with Mr. Kim. He demands that Mr. Kim delete the compromising video first, before they finalize the contract. He also assures Mr. Kim that he'll delete the video on his end, as he doesn't trust him. This time, Chairman Hong exudes confidence and successfully takes Mr. Kim's phone. He quickly connects it to the Wi-Fi router, giving his team access outside. Acting on Gangyong's orders, a police officer deletes all the data from the phone. Later that day, Mr. Kim returns home, feeling triumphant after securing the contract. However, he smells something unusual in his room. Opening his safe, he discovers his phone completely destroyed by fire. Realizing this was orchestrated by Chairman Hong and his team, Mr. Kim retrieves another phone belonging to one of his victims, Mr. Choi Tan, which he had stored with others in a drawer. He then calls an accomplice to recover Mr. O's location using the phone he's sending over. The accomplice, a corrupt police officer working at the headquarters, has been leaking information to Mr. Kim in exchange for money. The accomplice, a corrupt police officer working at the headquarters, has been leaking information to Mr. Kim in exchange for money. The next day, the mole informs Mr. Kim about videos found on the phone of a major loan shark. Mr. Kim acts quickly, sending his men to search for Mr. O based on the location provided by the corrupt officer. Meanwhile, Gun-woo and Woo-jin bribe Young to uncover full details about Inbium. Back at their apartment, while investigating Inbium, they receive a call from an unknown number. Damon answers, and the caller tells them to come to a specific location to rescue Mr. O. Damon's grandfather. Determined, Damon decides to join the boys and demonstrates her skill with a compound bow to convince them. The boys also call Mr. Moon for assistance, as he had worked with Mr. O before. At the designated location, they don't find Mr. O. Instead, they're ambushed by Mr. Kim's goons and Inbium it was a trap. Mr. Kim wants them dead, but the boys, now more skilled and physically prepared after their training, manage to fight back. With Damon and Mr. Moon's help, they take down the goons one by one. Mr. Moon battles one of the main gangsters, the judge, who tries to flee, while Gun-woo easily overpowers Inbium. They torture Young to extract Mr. O's location, then enlist Mr. Moon to pressure Inbium for more details. As they head out to rescue Mr. O, they relay the location to Gangyong, who tells them to wait for police backup. However, the mole leaks this information to Mr. Kim, who orders his men to move Mr. O before the police arrive. When law enforcement reaches the site, they find nothing. Meanwhile, Mr. Moon continues interrogating Inbium, but Inbium bites off his own tongue to avoid talking, forcing them to rush him to a hospital. The following day, Gangyong visits a coffee shop where an employee, on Mr. Kim's orders, poisons his drink. Sensing something is wrong, Gang Yong rushes to a nearby shop, grabs some salt, and uses it to induce vomiting, expelling the poison from his stomach. Tragically, the two officers who helped Gang Yong gather evidence against Mr. Kim are killed. Soon after, Gun-woo and Woo-jin receive a call from Mr. Kim, directing them to a new location to save Mr. Oh. This time, Mr. Kim warns them not to involve the police or Mr. Oh won't survive. Damin, determined as ever, insists on going with them, even without police intervention. After arriving at the location, Gun-woo and Woo-jin enter the building, while Damin is told to join them later. As expected, Mr. Kim's men ambush the boys, but they fight back fiercely, and no one is able to defeat them. Desperate, Mr. Kim grabs a knife and holds it to Mr. Oh's throat, threatening to kill him if they don't stop fighting. Just then, Damin arrives and shoots an arrow straight into Mr. Kim's arm. Injured, Mr. Kim manages to escape, but the boys and Damin rescue Mr. Oh. The police arrive shortly after, arresting all of Mr. Kim's men and uncovering significant evidence that leads to a warrant for a raid on Mr. Kim's house. During the raid, authorities find phones belonging to all the dead or missing individuals, which becomes even more damning evidence against Mr. Kim. His days of freedom are officially over. The corrupt police officer working as a mole for Mr. Kim is also arrested. However, Chairman Hong remains uneasy because he knows Mr. Kim still has his compromising video backed up on his laptop. Gun-woo and Woo-jin assure him they will find Mr. Kim and put an end to this. They visit Yong again to learn about Mr. Kim's possible hideouts, but Yong tells them that Jang-do might have the information they need. The next day, they meet with Jang-do, who agrees to help but demands a large sum of money in return. The boys manage to secure the funds from Chairman Hong and get the details of Mr. Kim's escape plan. Jang-do reveals that Mr. Kim plans to flee overseas on a cargo ship and even provides the container number where Mr. Kim will be hiding. With the plan in place, the boys bid farewell to Mr. Oh and Damin before heading to the coast. Once on the ship, they encounter Mr. Kim's men and take them down one by one. Eventually, Gun-woo confronts Mr. Kim directly. The two fight, and though Mr. Kim puts up a tough battle, Gun-woo overpowers him. Inside the container, they find not only Mr. Kim, but also all his hidden gold. Chairman Hong makes arrangements for Mr. Kim's arrest and finally retrieves his video. In the end, the gold is used to fund the construction of a hospital as a charitable effort, fulfilling the wish of Mr. Choi. Chairman Hong takes responsibility for overseeing the hospital and even rewards Gun-woo and Woo-jin with 2 gold bricks each for their efforts. Finally, Gun-woo and Woo-jin visit Gun-woo's mother, who has been living at an orphanage, bringing a heartfelt conclusion to their journey.